At the Spa Grand Prix, we saw the usual low downforce updates that we've already seen this year already in Canada and Baku, and we'll see again next week in Monza. Most interestingly, Ferrari brought an update that most of us weren't expecting. It's on the front heave damper. Now, the front heave damper is a unit that's operated by the suspension that works when the car's pitching, and this is normally from braking or at high downforce when the car's being pushed down. Now, the heave damper is quite a complicated unit, as you can see. You have a spring, a hydraulic damper, and an interta, and these all work together to control both the grip of the tyres, but equally importantly, the ride height and the way that the car angles against the track, which obviously is so crucial for downforce. Now, Ferrari, as we said, have had this set up for many years already, but they were somewhat behind the curve with the complicated setups that we saw last year, particularly with Mercedes and with Red Bull. And over the year, those complicated systems were outlawed. Ferrari potentially gained a little bit of performance relative to those teams as they ran a much more simple setup. What we saw in Belgium is they've actually changed this unit, and they've removed the interta unit, which is the shiny dome section on the side. This could be for two reasons. This could be because they're doing something slightly more complicated with the hydraulics in that side of the damper, which means that they had to take the interta away, or they didn't want the effect of an interta. Now, an interta is something that most of us heard about many years ago during the McLaren scandal. It was called a J damper at the time. It is a mass that spins inside the damper and just dampens out some of the frequencies, particularly those coming from the tyres as they bounce up and down over the circuit. So potentially what Ferrari were doing is either gaining from hydraulics, which was more an aero gain, or removing the interta, which potentially could give their tyres a bit more heat, particularly during qualifying, which is one of their weak points. So why Ferrari are doing this, but clear that they're starting to play with the car to get the performance closer in qualifying and during the race to Mercedes. In other news, we saw Mercedes, amongst other teams, test the Halo during free practice. Lewis Hamilton ran the Halo on the Mercedes, as you can see. Now, at this point, it's not so much for the drivers to get benefit from seeing the visibility of the Halo. It's much more gathering data for the engineers who are now making design decisions on the cooling and the effect that the Halo will have on the aero to the rear wing, and more importantly to the cooling inlets and the airbox inlets above the driver's head. So lots of teams will continue to test this as it becomes mandatory in 2018. At the last race in Hungary, there was a test in the week after, and something quite interesting was going on at Williams. Obviously a team that was struggling terribly at Spa, but what we saw is they were playing with the gearbox and the rear suspension. Now, Williams are the only team to continue to run a cast aluminium gearbox. Everyone apart from Renault run a carbon fibre gearbox now, which obviously is structurally much more efficient. It's lighter, you can play with the design and what have you. Williams didn't change the actual gearbox in the Hungary test. What they were doing was playing with the rear suspension, which is all part of the sort of the directional changes that they're doing with the car planning under Paddy Lowe's leadership into 2018. The understanding that we have is that the lower wishbone was brought a bit lower to change the geometry of the rear suspension in order to get the rear tyres working better under traction and in cornering. But equally, we understand that they're going to be changing from the cast aluminium gearbox and next year going to a carbon fibre gearbox, much the same as other teams have done, where you have a carbon outer structure and then what we call a cartridge gearbox inside, which is a completely self-contained unit which separates the gearbox as per the regulations from the structure of the rear end, which is carbon fibre. So we'll keep an eye on testing that Williams do during free practice and other events, and this just shows the importance of Paddy Lowe's influence in getting this team back with their performance, particularly with some of the designs that Williams have been running for several years.